And so we have a very active community around the world. We also have special interest groups that are focused on different topics within the game development, such as programming, production, writing, things of that nature. So, so it's a very active community. We've been around for over 20 years. And so if you're interested in it, you should check out IGDA.org. What I want to talk about today is the Developer Satisfaction Survey, which is a survey that we do every year, in which we try and determine effectively how developers feel about their jobs and how they feel about their industry and where they think the game industry is going. So we launched this last year. It replaced what we used to have, a quality of life survey that we did a few years ago. So we want to update our knowledge of the demographics. So we want to know who is making games and the diversity of our industry, and we want to understand the quality of life issues, like how much time do people work on games, do they get paid enough, I mean, all that kind of stuff. We also want to gauge their overall satisfaction with their jobs in the state of the industry. So the survey that was done this year was done from the 2nd of March through the 15th of April, and so it's basically a 6-week window of survey. Here are the demographics. I will not read through all this, but you can see that what our sample size was like, and some of the basic demographics here of who answered the survey. Approximately almost half of the respondents were from the United States, and then another almost 10%, well, 9% from Canada. And then you can see how it distributed through the rest of the world. We did have our survey was fully localized this year into Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, French, Italian, German, and so that helped us get a lot of people answering, but obviously we would like to get a lot more. So the number we have there, 2,932 people, I'm hoping to see that increase more and more as we continue to do this survey. In terms of the gender balance within the industry, so this is how it broke out for the numbers this year. So you see about 69% reporting that they're male, 20% female, and then the rest of the gender breakdown there. You can see how that compares to other countries. So that's the number globally based on our survey, but then we had data from the United Kingdom, which was 15%, or Finland was 20%, Canada was 16%. So roughly, that's the number of women working in the industry tends to be around 15 to 20% based on the numbers that we're seeing. Obviously, that is going to change depending on where you are. In some countries, it's more, in some countries, it's less. We asked people, how would you rate your overall job satisfaction? So you can see that about 38% said it's somewhat positive, and 28% said very positive. So a majority of game developers feel that they have good satisfaction in their jobs, which is something we want to see. Not very many people said it was negative or very negative. So game developers like their jobs. They're pretty satisfied with what they're doing. But when we look at what opportunities they have in the game industry, we had 26% said somewhat negative. And so it basically balanced a little towards the neutral to negative side in terms of what opportunities. So even though game developers are satisfied with their current jobs, they're looking ahead to what's happening next and what opportunities are there, and they're not seeing as much opportunity as they might want. And so the outlook for the future for them is not as positive. How would you characterize the growth rate of the organization? So it's been growing quite a bit. So while we are seeing an industry that has recovered from the economic recession of the last several years, the global recession, and so even though the game industry was not affected strongly by that recession, it was affected just like every other business in the world was affected. But we're seeing considerable growth take place in the industry. So you can see there 59% are reporting moderate or considerable growth, which is a good thing. We want to see the game industry continue to grow, and all of the projections that we show from third parties, like for example, the analysis company PricewaterhouseCoopers, every year they release a study, a projection of where the interactive entertainment industry is going in the next 5 years. And the PricewaterhouseCoopers study shows that game development is still on a global basis going to still grow around 6 to 7% per year. And in emerging markets, it's going to be growing in double digits. So it's quite fast. In some countries, like in Southeast Asia and Africa, they're seeing growth of like 20 or 25% over the next few years. And of course, a lot of that is due to mobile games, because gaming consoles and PCs are still pretty, they're inaccessible and expensive for a lot of people, but mobile phones are not. So a lot of this growth is happening on mobile games. When we asked them specifically about the growth rate for the next 3 years, well, I'm sorry I confused that. The first one was growth in the last 3 years. This new one is growth in the next 3 years. So you can see where it's kind of continuing on that theme that we're seeing continued growth within the game industry, at least from the perception of game developers. So it's a good thing. We're seeing more people are optimistic about the growth of the industry and of their particular organization. Now, when we ask them, do they feel that there's equal opportunity and treatment for everyone in the game industry, the answer is a pretty loud no. So you can see there almost 50% of people said no. And so that's not a positive thing. That's something that we need to look into and try and discern why is there not equal treatment and opportunity. Some of that is based on issues like diversity, like gender, but there's other issues too where people feel that in certain types of jobs within the game industry, they feel they may not have the same kind of opportunity that you would in another job. So for example, people who tend to do quality assurance or localization may feel that they don't have as much opportunity as somebody who is in production or programming, because there's a lot more opportunities there. So so that's something that we're trying to look into and discern why that's so negative. When we ask them about their quality of life, you can see here that the biggest answer was 38%, somewhat positive. If you take that with the very positive answer of 29%, then basically we're seeing at least more than half of game developers feel that their quality of life is positive, which is something we want to see that. That's a good sign. We are still dealing with a lot of issues in the game industry, like crunch time, in which companies expect employees to work, over hours and extended hours, oftentimes without any additional pay. And that continues to be an issue in the game industry on a global basis. And but here we're seeing that the general quality of life developers are saying is on the positive side. Then we also asked them about how important is diversity in game content. So how are people of color, how are women depicted in games? And you can see there that many developers felt that it's a very important issue. So, either 71% either answered very important or somewhat important. So that's a pretty strong majority that feels that there needs to be, diversity in game content. And unfortunately, in a lot of the mainstream games that we've been seeing over the last, decade or two or three, usually, for example, the main protagonist is a white male, and you don't see a lot of diversity in the main characters. That is slowly changing. We also asked them about how important is diversity in the game industry, so on the development side. And again, we have 2/3 of the respondents saying that it's an important issue. And so it is something that has been very prevalent in the last year, especially because we've had a lot of issues around diversity in the game industry over the last year. And so people want diversity in the games and they want diversity in the industry. And so that's something that we're trying to help see. We're trying to help make that change. When we ask them about the most important factors for future growth of the game industry, you can see here that the different factors that were the top 6 answers and the number of respondents who agreed with that particular answer. So you can see the advancement of game design is number 1. So basically developers are saying that game design must improve, it must continue to grow and get better in order to see growth for the industry. And then you can see the other storytelling, more diversity in game content. So again, diversity is a very loud theme here. Better discovery of games relates to, that's an answer that we hear from a lot of indie developers, because they create video games and they are not able to get an audience for them. And so how their games get discovered and how their games get marketed is a really important issue right now. Also funding for game development, and mainly they mean funding both from government sources and private sources, as well as the challenges around crowdfunding using websites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And then of course, monetization is another one that was high on the list, although not a lot of people responded high, but it's another issue that they feel is important for industry growth, is how do we actually make money off the games. We also asked them specifically, which developer or publisher by name would you most like to work for? So we're curious what companies they see as being like the most desirable to work for. And so the #1 company was Valve. And then you can go down the list here: Blizzard, Riot Games, BioWare, my own studio, which I'll talk about that in a minute, Nintendo, Bethesda, Ubisoft, Naughty Dog, and Double Fine. So these were the most desirable companies to work for from the developer perspective. Now the #5 answer, my own studio, is interesting because we see that throughout the survey that a lot of developers ultimately, their real desire is to work for themselves and to run their own studio. Last year, this was the #2 answer. So last year in 2014, Valve was #1 and my own studio was #2, but that's obviously dropped down a little bit this year. But it's still an important answer because it talks to the desire of a lot of developers as creative people, since games are an art form and games are effectively a creative expression, that a lot of the creative people who make games, they ultimately want to do their own thing. They don't want to, they don't want to make someone else's vision. They want to do their own. And then we also asked this question, which I think is a really important one, is we asked developers to tell us what factors they feel create the negative perception of the game industry in the public. So how does the public view the game industry? And if they view it negatively, then what is contributing to that negative perception? And you can see here the ranked answers. So sexism among gamers, that's the #1 answer that was given here. That's not a huge surprise given the events of the last year and what's been going on in the game industry. Close behind it is working conditions, which is an interesting answer because you would not expect the public to understand the working conditions in the game industry, but developers feel that that's a very important issue, and it's an issue that might make the game industry look negative. And so again, sexism in games is up there on the list. You can see a perceived link to violence between video games and violence, perceived link to obesity, sexism in the workforce. So again, sexism is high on the list. Racism among gamers, lack of diversity, racism in games, racism in the workforce. So you can see a lot of these issues that they feel are creating a negative perception are either related to sexism or racism. So again, these are diversity issues primarily, and so it's become a very highlighted topic in the last couple of years within the game industry, and it's something that we're trying to address. Not only the IGDA as an organization, but as an industry. I'm part of a group that is being led by several companies: Intel, Microsoft, Sony, Facebook, Google. A lot of other companies are involved in this initiative to actually try and improve the issues around sexism and racism in the industry from the top down. But this is something that we're working very hard on right now. So if you're curious about reading the summary report, we do have it's up on the IGD website, and there's the link right there. So we do have a summary report that we released about a month ago. And so it's a PDF file that you can download and read more about this summary report. We also have the information about the 2014 developer survey that's up on the website as well. So if you're curious about that, I would encourage you to take a look. So that is all I wanted to say in terms of my presentation.
Okay, Kate, thank you very much. I will check if anyone has any question. Entonces, pues, ¿alguien tiene alguna pregunta? Para que por favor la pueda escribir por el chat. En inglés o en español. Vamos a dar un minuto para eso.
I guess not.
Sí, pues, pues sí, pues complementando lo que les comentaba al principio, este es un webinar más de esta serie que estamos llevando a cabo, pues varias organizaciones alrededor de IEEE Región 9. La siguiente semana y dentro de 15 días tenemos otros 2 webinars para que por favor se conecten a la misma hora. Bueno, ok. Aquí, Kate, a question. You talked about all negative topics as racism and diversity.
Oh, I see the question. So what do you think we can do to change that? So, well, I think part of the issue, I think one of the things that we're trying to do to fix the situation is that we need, basically, when we have a workforce that is not very diverse, that's why we end up with having the perception of, you know, we'll see sexism in the games content, for example. You know, why do we see so many white males as the main character in games? Because most of the people creating games are white males. And so they're basically just creating what they know. And so I think if we can get more people of diversity, and I mean not just gender diversity, not just racial diversity, but also, you know, geographic and cultural diversity too. You know, you don't see, for example, very many, you know, big game titles that have, for example, a Latin American hero, or an African hero, or someone else, you know, who's outside of North America or Europe. And so I think it's really important to, one of the things that we have to do is try and improve the pipeline to get more people who are of, you know, people of a diverse background, skilled in game development, so that they can enter the industry and have a successful career and have some level of influence in what actually goes into the games. And I think one of the reasons why the independent game community, the indie developers, are so popular right now is because they're creating games for them and that represent them. And so there is far more diversity in the indie game community because basically anyone can make games now. And so we're seeing in the indie community really, really interesting games that are very diverse, very different than what you see from like Microsoft and Sony, you know, the typical big franchise games. And so but one of the things that we're trying to do, this group that I'm a part of, is we're trying to fix that pipeline. So for example, with getting more women into the industry, we need to see more women choosing game development as a career path. We see a lot of women who get into science and technology in engineering fields, but they don't go into game development. So, so that's one of the things that we're trying to fix. And it's going to be a long-term solution, but it's something that we're focusing on long-term.
Okay. Another question. What is the reason to have people considering decreasing the industry growth? Do you think the quality of the product has something to do with that perception, or maybe a poor management of their own business?
That is a great question. So yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and I think you touched upon a couple of the key reasons. So one of the reasons why the industry growth may decrease is because we're not seeing innovation, and it's the products are the same thing over and over again. I think some gamers get tired of it. Some people don't, but I think there's a certain segment of the population that gets tired of seeing Call of Duty Part 12, you know, even though, you know, those games will make a lot of money. When Halo 5 comes out, it will make a lot of money. When Fallout 4 comes out, it will make a lot of money. Just like Grand Theft Auto 5 made over $1 billion US in a very short time, because it's just a very popular title. But I don't think there's long-term sustainability of that model. And so that's one of the reasons why when Sony and Microsoft released their new consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One, that's why they went to great effort to support independent developers on their platform, because I think both Sony and Microsoft understand that the future of content and the future innovation is coming from indie developers, not from big companies anymore. And so I think they're in a word, they are desperate to make sure that they have innovative, new, fresh content on their platforms in order to make it more appealing to the public, and so that we see continued growth in the industry. And so I think that's a good thing. I also think it might be a bad thing for Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, because we're seeing in the long term the consumption of consoles is decreasing to some degree. And with the continued growth of mobile devices, I don't know how long consoles are going to be around. So these big companies are going to have to change their business models. But poor management of their business is also another issue too, because I mean, one of the problems right now is that the industry continues to change so quickly that a lot of businesses are not responding to that change very well. And so if they're using a model that's even 5 years old, that model for business may not work. And so that's another problem.
Okay. Many people in Argentina think characters to sexual, especially women characters. Do you think it may cause rejection by part of the public?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the way that women are portrayed in video games has historically been pretty negative. When you see them being too sexual when they don't need to be, you know, there's a lot of criticism around that right now, and it's a valid criticism. I think in the public's perception, when they see these characters that are over-sexualized when they don't need to be, they see that gives video games a negative perception in the public. And I think that's a real problem. There's a lot of examples where the game character, the female game character, does not need to be that exaggerated. She doesn't need gigantic breasts. She should probably wear more clothing if she's fighting a dragon. She's not going to fight in a metal bikini, because that's just not practical. And so there's a lot of things that don't make sense in terms of how women have been portrayed in the industry. And so there is a lot of awareness right now in the mainstream game industry to change these things, because they realize that, you know, the public is looking at it negatively, and even internally within the game industry, like the statistics showed that I just mentioned. I think that, you know, that's something that is going to change over time, especially because in a lot of markets today, especially in North America and Europe, we are seeing that about 50% of game players are women, and so they are alienating 50% of their market, which is not a good business model.
Yes. Do you think all these industry pioneers are being properly recognized by the industry?
You know, I think yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of industry pioneers that have been recognized, but I think there's a lot of people who haven't been. I mean, for example, a lot of the pioneers in the industry are women. A lot of people don't even know that. And, you know, a lot of the original games that were created way back in like the 70s and 80s, there were women who were writing them, women who were programming them. You know, plus there's a lot of other men, there's a lot of other people who were involved in the process who I don't think are fully recognized. And, you know, we have quite a few rock star people in the game industry who have gotten a lot of recognition. I mean, like Nolan Bushnell, for example, who created Atari and was responsible for the whole Atari revolution. I mean, he deserves that recognition, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of other people who should be recognized.
Okay, and finally, how do you see gamification in other files?
You know, I think this is an area that is increasing very rapidly. You know, gamification of you know, education for starters. That's a huge topic right now. Is how, you know, because studies have been conducted that show that when you gamify education, kids actually respond better. They're great. They have better grades. They have better attention span. You know, so we know that gamification can work, and we know that the human brain responds very, very well to games as a form of learning, as a form of passive learning. For example, they did a study where they showed that surgeons, if surgeons play video games before they do their surgery, they are less prone to make mistakes, and their work is actually better. And so, you know, so that kind of thing, they're seeing a real effect. So I think that we're only going to see an increased gamification of a lot of other areas outside of entertainment, and I think it's a really good thing.
Yes. About new technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, do you have some information about this, about the growth for the next year?
Yeah, so I don't have specific numbers at the moment, and I think, to be honest, I think it might be a little bit guessing, just because the virtual reality. Well, let me state a couple things. Well, last week I was in Los Angeles at the Oculus Connect event. So Oculus did their own event, and it was fantastic. It was amazing technology. It was amazing demonstrations of all kinds of different things, both entertainment and gamified things like cooking and, you know, workplace issues and stuff like that. It was very, very interesting. I think that virtual reality applications are definitely going to be the thing that happens in the short term. We're seeing it with Oculus. We're seeing it with Sony's Morpheus. We're seeing it with the Valve HTC partnership. So I think all of the virtual reality technology, that is going to show explosive growth over the next 5 years at least. And we're seeing it, I mean, next year is basically going to be the year of virtual reality in terms of interface, because all of these technologies will be launching. The Morpheus will launch, Oculus is going to release in the first quarter, the HTC Valve system is going to release. We've already had the Gear VR system that Samsung has, which is a very inexpensive headset to use with a Samsung phone. That's come out next month in November, and it's only $99 US, which is for a virtual reality headset, that's pretty cheap. Although you still have to buy a phone, and the phone is not cheap, it's expensive. But so I think we're going to be seeing a lot of virtual reality applications, especially in games, but in other things as well in the next several years. Now, augmented reality is actually the bigger challenge. I think augmented reality has more potential to be used in many, many other areas than virtual reality, but the technology is not there yet. I mean, the Microsoft HoloLens is a very interesting technology. It works pretty well, but I still think it's not where we want it to be for consumers to use it on like an everyday basis. So I think augmented reality is something we're probably going to see maybe 5 to 10 years. We'll see it come along and it finally improve. But I think virtual reality is here right now, and that's something that's going to grow very quickly. Okay, Kate. Please, the last question. I am interested in grading how this market is down. Could you repeat that? It cut out a little bit.
Noel Ramírez, por favor, ¿Podría escribir la pregunta un poco más clara?
I'm sorry. It still didn't come through. I didn't understand the question.
Yes.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
¿De dónde habla?
Hello. ¿Sí, no me ven?
I'm still here.
Okay. Bueno, no, pues okay. Again, thank you very much for your time and hope
Yes,
to keep
thank
in
you.
touch.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bueno, sí, señora, thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Y, pues, vuelvo y les comento que aún tenemos 2 webinars más de esta serie, así que los esperamos este próximo jueves siguiente, para que por favor se conecten a la misma hora con este mismo link. ¿Sí? Entonces, muchas gracias por todo y pues nos vemos en una próxima oportunidad.